welcome to this special segment of ACS today. We have a CNN executive producer, and I'm Sam. This is Sam Turbalanch, and then this is Aisha.
And I'm Alireza.
Perfect. Now, we're addressing CNN's My Freedom Day, which is happening today on March 14th, and we're basically trying to relate how us here at ACS today tried to approach this versus how CNN approaches this. So our first question is, ACS today has a very smaller community-oriented audience, high schoolers, then some elementary schoolers, some middle schoolers, and a lot of teachers. So one of our main problems is we can't be too serious, because if we have too many serious segments, we lose the high school audience a lot of the times. So how does CNN, being a large media company with an extensive audience, deal with engaging your viewers?
So that's a great question, Sam. So as you say, I mean, we're a bit bigger than you guys. Our operation, we reach just a bit. We reach a lot more sort of homes, and it's across the world. So we have a global audience, and sometimes English isn't, the people who tune into CNN, maybe English isn't their first language. So we need to really be careful about how we present stories. But at the end of the day, if a story is a good story, you don't read, it transcends any sort of language barrier. And that's the heart of the Freedom Day project or any other big project at CNN. The challenge for us is to find a story that really touches a wide swathe of people, so a lot more people can connect with it, can understand it, can say, you know what, that thing happening to that family in Sri Lanka is something that I could connect with because it's a challenge that I see as well. So our struggle on CNN on a daily basis is how to take these very complex issues, modern day slavery, to geopolitical rivalries, to ongoing conflict and war, and how to break that down into sort of bite-sized, consumable stories that people can connect with. And sometimes we try to have fun with it. Today is a fun day. It's a celebration. Of course, we're talking about a very serious, heavy topic like modern day slavery, but we want to do it in a cool, fun way. And that's why we're teaming up with you millennials, the hipsters.
Yeah, that's what we tried to do as well, because I was one of the ones who made one of the segments for our ACS Today about My Freedom Day. Mm-hmm. So we went around to teachers, high schoolers, middle schoolers, and elementary schoolers and asked them what freedom meant to them.
Nice.
And so we included all the teachers and the older high school students because we knew they would give more of the in-depth responses, and then the elementary students are also there to be the more funny side of it. Like there's kids who answer, Abraham Lincoln is what freedom means, or freedom is to be free. Just like those little fun little things that keep our high school audience engaged while also being very oriented towards the My Freedom.
That's really cool you did that, because that's the essence of freedom, right? I mean, if you're talking about Freedom Day, I mean, a lot of people, especially you guys are budding journalists as well. You're gonna find out that when you ask people to reflect and weigh in on serious issues, like they automatically become very serious and they feel like they need to step up to the plate and address things in a certain manner with a certain terminology. But if you go to an elementary school kid and say, listen, what does freedom mean to you? And maybe it's like, well, freedom means I can have ice cream whenever I want. And that's the essence of it, right? And sometimes that gets lost with the lexicon and and all the chatter that goes on. But so that's really cool that you guys did that. I want to watch that clip.
Yeah. And one of our problems here is trying to connect the topics we discuss back to our community. Mm-hmm. And so, one way that we did it in a segment that I helped to produce was we had an IB art show happening where artists at our school presented artworks that they've been making over 2 years of IB. And so what we did is we interviewed the artists and we tried to get their perspective on how they can relate freedom through their artwork. Mm-hmm. And so, some people discussed about colors or, how certain shapes and certain topics that they express through their artworks or emotions, they use to convey certain things of freedom or to show, lack of freedom. Like I know one of our artists, Toby, she had a beautiful piece where it's sort of like the current generation, the little kids being captivated and sort of, just watching TV, and there's less time spent outside.
Yeah.
Kids aren't out as much. They have a lot of time spent with screens and things like that. So we wanted to look at different aspects of freedom through art like that.
That's really cool. That's a really good way of doing it. And, because that, anytime you allow people to express themselves in whatever, medium they choose, And you were at Journalism Day and at CNN. You were there as well, right? Were you
No,
at
I
Journalism?
wasn't.
No, both of us weren't.
Or next year. But the thing is that in the end of the day, it's all about stories. It's all about storytelling. A piece of art is telling a story. What we do on a daily basis at CNN Abu Dhabi, we put out a story. It's an hour-long story, and it starts with death and destruction, or the fact that the U.S. Secretary of State just got fired, or and then it ends up with the celebration of the life of Stephen Hawking, or an amazing football story, or an amazing art story. So. It's all the power of story. So whatever way you decide to bring out that story, be it through an artwork or through a piece of journalism that you guys have produced, I think it works.
Yeah, I was the technical producer for the whole ACS Today show.
Awesome.
And the first thing we do when putting out an ACS Today show is look at the calendar to see what major events are going on.
Yeah.
So our first, the first thing we looked at was CNN My Freedom Day. That's like a huge event here. Everyone's super excited to have you guys on campus.
That's
It
awesome.
means a lot to us. And we also saw that March 8th was International Women's Day.
Yep.
So we tried to sort of intertwine the two big things and sort of bring awareness to both topics, how women in today's society are sometimes not treated as equal as they should to men, but also intertwining that with the whole freedom thing, how like everyone takes their own perspective on freedom, but to me freedom is like having the same laws, having the same rights, and being able to do what everyone else can.
Absolutely.
So I think connecting that International Women's Day to CNN My Freedom Day was something we really tried to do, and we had interviews with moms especially, because moms are super important in today's society.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got to interview my mom about what she thought.
Cool. What'd she say?
She said a couple of things. She was mainly nervous, but she said that moms help really drive, the social consciousness of their children.
Yeah.
Like, I know I take a lot of who I am as a person from my mother, and
Correct.
yeah, that's why I appreciate her so much.
Well, that's exactly like and what you guys did with looking at the calendar. That's what we do. So we go in and we say, okay, what's coming up? What events are coming up? And then we plan sort of big shows. I don't know if you guys caught it, but we did a big show down in Dubai for International Women's Day where we had like a panel discussion with Becky, and we had a bunch of guests. But when you talk, there's definitely that link between celebrating and fighting for gender equality.
Yeah.
And we have a project called #AsEquals. That's like a year-long project, so you guys maybe want to check that out as well. It's cool. It's got like all these different stories. But with Freedom Day and your point about your mother, a lot of times, especially in this day and age, when you talk about like women's rights and stuff, people are like, oh yeah, but how about International Men's Day? But what about the men? But the fact of the matter is, and studies show that, say you take a developing country, and if you want to give aid to that country, studies show that if you give your aid money to the mother in that family, so you guys know this, I'm sure you guys have studied, that money is more likely to be spent on education, on food for the family, on stuff that's going to allow for the next generation to have the better chance of pulling themselves out of poverty. Now, it's not the same if you give that money to the father of the family. So there's no doubt that your mom and the role she plays in making you who you are. It's not about just feeding you and making sure you wear nice clothes. She instills in you and upon you the values of a right society. So when we talk about Women's Day, we're not talking about some nice cuddly feeling. If half of our society, of members of our society, are treated with respect and the dignity that they deserve, then we as an entire society will benefit. And so one example, for example, I saw this morning, you guys watched that show on Netflix, The Crown?
Yes.
So I just saw this morning that the lead actress on that show, so the Queen, was paid less than the guy who plays her husband, Prince Philip. So that's just outlandish, right? This is 2018. She's the queen. She's the queen in that show.
Yeah.
Now listen, this is obviously we can't launch into an attack on Netflix, but I just thought that's a ridiculous example, right?
Yeah.
Another big thing we wanted to ask you is, freedom is a massive topic.
Yeah.
I mean, it encompasses, you know, all of humanity. So we want to know, how does CNN approach such a large topic to, you know, try to, like you said, break into those smaller segments that are more consumable for your audience?
I think you got to go big or go home, right? So you got to take something like freedom, and you got to go for it full throttle. You know, you got to say, we're talking about modern day slavery, because that's unacceptable. And at CNN, we've taken on this mantle that, you know, with journalism, it's always like there's two sides to every story. There's no two sides to slavery and you know, human bondage and not allowing people, you know, domestic servitude. There's no two sides to that, you know. So that's why we're really taking a stand on this, and we're saying we're gonna fight this every day. Every year we're gonna do a My Freedom Day, which is gonna be an amazing celebration. But throughout the year, we're gonna bring you the story. So you guys watched like Nema's reporting in Libya. You know, so she got that reporting out of this slave auction, you know, stuff that you guys would read about, like, you know, AP American History or something like that, and then you see it happening today in Libya, and that through that reporting, we pushed for action. So yeah, it's a massive topic, but you know, it's something that in the end of the day, we all humans, if we're not free, then what's the point, right? I mean, until the robots come and rule over us.
Yeah. No, another, you know, question we had to ask is, while you're reporting on these things, how can you report on these successfully while also maintaining the dignity of those that have been affected by these cruelties?
That's very important. That's very important. Because you don't want to sometimes be like, oh, look at this person, isn't it terrible, and then kind of like just embarrass them. Like, you don't want to do that. So you got to be very careful. You got to be very careful when you're trying to do that. You got to be oftentimes you got to you put yourself out of the story. It's not about you. You know, sometimes that's a problem. It's like, you know, you have a correspondent who goes out there and it's like, oh, look at me, I'm in this amazing location and there's war and destruction, but I'm here. But that's not the point, right? You were there to report on their story. It's hard, but you got to do it. You got to find way, and you got to be sensitive, and you got to make it as much about them and how they're feeling, and above all, you got to make it so that you're not making them. You know, you can't victim shame. You know, you can't say, oh, well, why did you get into this position? You know, maybe it was your fault. You know, all these things that we've seen. So it's hard. I mean, you just got to think about it. I feel like all of us have common sense. It's there somewhere, but sometimes you just got to, like, you know, listen to it.
Yeah, and I'm sure when, you know, approaching, and especially reporters reporting on these stories and seeing these things firsthand, it must be really difficult not to become attached and affected as a reporter, and to try to maintain a more unbiased position, to report what's there and not what you think is right, you know, to kind of distinguish those things. Yeah,
I mean, there's two schools of thought when it comes to that. One is that as a reporter, you have to be very objective. You got to be unbiased. You can't get emotionally involved. You can't. But really, with some topics, I feel like that barrier, that emotional barrier, no matter what, it's just going to break down. So we have one of our senior international correspondents, Arwa Damon. So you guys will probably see her reporting. She's done war zones, you know, for over a decade now. And she's got so passionate about what happens to these kids in war zones that she set up this amazing NGO called Inara, I believe. That's like helping fund reconstructive surgery, all these things that for kids who've been maimed by conflict. So some people channel it that way, and then some people write like amazing books, and then some people have PTSD and you know, struggle with that for years as a journalist because they've seen war up front. But I feel like you can't be objective when it comes to an issue like you know, modern day slavery, when it comes to an issue of children being bombed or gassed, when it comes, like, there's no objectivity there, right? Wrong is wrong, and I feel like you need to have that moral compass as a journalist, you know, to go in.
So by coming to ACS and sharing your ideas of My Freedom Day, what are you really trying to get out of this? What, like, obviously you want change and you want that, but by coming to our school, what awareness do you want to spread?
So this is the second year that we've come to ACS for My Freedom Day, and what we want to achieve, I'm looking at it, U3, right? I mean, that's what we've achieved. You know, you guys now are ambassadors in the fight against global slavery and modern day slavery. You guys know the topics better than I do. You'll research about it. You're gonna go to university. You're gonna have that at the back of your mind. You're gonna go into society. I mean, I was active when I was in a high school. When I was a high school student, and I was involved with NGOs and stuff, and that stuff doesn't leave. You know, so like you guys are all you have this social consciousness that maybe some of your peers don't have, and that's the point. You know, the point is, you know, you guys are smarter than a lot of adults. You know, and you will be. You know, so it's like get them when they're young. And get them the sort of information and education that they need to make wise choices. Every single one of you are going to be leaders in any field that you decide to go into. And now you know that slavery still exists and that we have to fight against it. And this is what we wanted to achieve, and I think we've achieved that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Obviously, the CNN My Freedom Day is a great way in, I don't know, spreading that social consciousness into the viewers, both at the CNN global audience, but it'll help our small community as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so as an ACS student, what would you recommend we do to try and obviously spreading the word is crucial in understanding and stopping these global crises, but what do you think Sam or me or Aisha can do as an ACS student to help?
Well, I mean, you know, I think there's a couple of things you can do. I mean, you know, knowledge is key, you know, so you guys can spend X amount of hours a day, you know, on whatever you want, but then you could also spend some time learning about these topics, being an involved member of society, not sort of tuning off and not saying, you know what, that stuff, that politics, that geopolitical, it's a bit boring, you know, I'm not really interested. Because you got to get engaged. You know, as we're seeing in America, for example, every single vote counts. All your voices count. So I think as not only as an ACS student, as a young person coming up in this world, like you just gotta educate yourself, be open to new ideas. But also, we're living in a part of the world that, you know, we are maybe closer to touching some of these issues than maybe some of our peers elsewhere. So be a bit more aware of that. And yeah, I think, you know, that is the key for all of us, is to just constantly learn, and try to be a decent human being in our own lives as well.
One of the other segments that we included in our video was some 8th graders who had written a poem called Never Again, about the things that are happening in the U.S. right now with gun violence. And so that was one of the other things that we were noticing, how even the younger students were getting involved. They're not that young, but they're getting involved and they're putting their ideas forward, like you were saying.
Yeah. Well, because it impacts you guys, right? I mean, that's like what we saw in Florida with the Parkland survivors. They're like, oh, why are young people getting engaged and getting involved? Well, because it's their lives, you know. So they should have a choice about what happens on their, you know, school campuses and what happens to their friends and to their. So I think the more young people get involved and engaged, the better it is for all of us, you know, because we've seen what situations we get into when we leave the shop to the older guys. So it's time, and guys specifically, I guess women will do a better job. So yeah, I think all of us should definitely get more involved.
Well, with so many, you know, huge stories going on, I mean, Venezuela, the war in Syria, you know, Russia meddling with U.S. elections, the president being investigated in the U.S. and things like that. How does CNN make My Freedom Day stand out in contrast to all these massive stories that are always happening?
So that's a big struggle. That's a great question, because it is a daily struggle. Like whenever you plan one of these big things, you're like, God, news gods, please don't like send a massive breaking news. So that's what happened yesterday, right? So we had this, Richard Quest was doing a special show from the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson, I think, airport, which is the world's busiest, and they're doing this entire thing about like fighting human trafficking, and then Rex Tillerson got fired. So you can't be like, oh yeah, well, we're just going to talk about this, we're not going to talk about that. You have to you have to be able, and you have to learn, and you have to train your audience to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is, it sounds like it's a no-brainer, but it's a bit more difficult.
Mm.
So you got to say, listen, we know this is a very important story, so we'll do this, but also this other story is also very important. And then with the news cycle now, especially with U.S. politics, it's non-stopped, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we, I think, as consumers, because to begin with, we're all consumers of news. Both as consumers and as producers of news, we need to be, we need to learn to be able to think about multiple issues at the same time, which goes back to our conversation about moms. Moms are masters of multitasking, right? So I think all of us, there's another thing we could learn from our moms.
Yeah. Well, just this morning, I turned on CNN maybe to see a little bit if there's any My Freedom Day with ACS on there. But my family and I watch CNN every morning just to get information.
Yeah.
Like Rex Tillerson was a big thing, but also we were watching the special election near Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, and that was crucial. Like, I haven't kept up with it, but it's super duper close.
Super close,
It's
yeah.
like down to the
Absentee ballots,
the absentee ballots, and just keeping my mind on the special elections. And then there was an ad for CNN My Freedom Day, with the modern day slavery in Libya. And then all of a sudden my brain switched to that.
Yeah.
And it's a different feeling watching American politics to seeing such a sad and awful thing that's happening all around the world with the My Freedom Day. And I felt like the way CNN portrayed that was really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That's good to know that we got viewers like you watching and tuning in. Yeah. I mean, but we do this, right? I mean, you're on Facebook, then you're on Twitter, then you're on your Instagram page. Like, you're switching between different platforms. You have different audiences. Like, when you tweet, do you guys tweet?
No.
We
got some people back
We've got
there.
them. They're tweeting.
So when these guys tweet, they're doing it differently to when they post on Instagram, to when they post on Facebook, right? Like, you guys all get it. It's become part of our DNA. That's the same with news. You just gotta, like, all this massive thunderstorm of information is gonna hit you every single day. The news is not gonna slow down because it's just the way it is. And you just got to be able to, like, process it.
Yeah.
Do you have any last advice for any ACS students or members of ACS today who are trying to approach issues like this on how we best can, convey the importance of these issues to our audience and maintain their engagement?
Honestly, I think you guys are awesome. You're doing great work. So it's not advice, but I would just say, for me, always think about, is that something that I would watch? Because you're the best judge of what is a good piece of product, right?
Yeah.
So always think, is that something that I would watch? Is that a good story? Will I connect with that story? Does this story touch others? Someone outside, will he be able to understand that story? So to me, the best advice is always think about yourself, put yourself in the audience's shoes and say, hey, is this something that I will watch, I'll learn something, and I'll enjoy? Once you get that done, I think you're fantastic. But you guys need no advice.
Awesome.
Tremendous. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.